The words hung in the air between them like a bridge. Neither was ready to cross, yet somehow James Williams had already taken the first step. "I missed how easy we used to be," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of months of careful distance and unspoken truths. The golden light from the fireplace flickered across his face as he leaned forward on the couch, closing the space that had grown between them over the past few weeks. Zachary Anderson felt his breath catch in his throat, watching as James's eyes searched his face with an intensity that made his heart race against his ribs. The apartment fell silent except for the soft crackling of the fire and the distant hum of traffic outside their window. James's hand moved almost unconsciously toward Zachary's, fingers brushing against knuckles in a touch that sent electricity shooting up his arm. James continued, his voice barely above a whisper, and then he was leaning in without saying another word, his lips finding Zachary's in a kiss that tasted like coming home after years of wandering in the dark. But to understand how they arrived at this moment, with James's confession hanging between them and the taste of possibility on their lips, we need to go back to where it all began to unravel 3 months earlier when everything seemed simpler, and the distance between friendship and something more felt like an ocean neither of them knew how to cross. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. The morning light streamed through the kitchen window as Zachary stood at the counter, methodically preparing coffee with the same precision he brought to everything in his life. His movements were deliberate, measured, a stark contrast to the chaos that had been building in his chest for the past 2 years and 4 months. He knew the exact timeline because he had marked it unconsciously, the way someone might track the phases of the moon or the changing of seasons. It had been exactly that long since he realized he was in love with his best friend. James emerged from his bedroom, hair still tousled from sleep, wearing the faded blue t-shirt that Zachary had come to associate with lazy Sunday mornings and the particular vulnerability that came with the space between sleeping and waking. "You're up early," James observed, his voice still rough with sleep as he padded across the hardwood floor in bare feet. "Couldn't sleep," Zachary replied, not turning around as he poured coffee into 2 mugs, the steam rising between them like a question mark. It was the truth, though not the whole truth. He hadn't been sleeping well for weeks, not since James had started dating Sandra Torres, a marketing executive with laugh lines around her eyes and a way of making James smile that cut through Zachary like a knife turning in his chest. James accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping his fingers around the ceramic mug as if drawing warmth from more than just the liquid inside. "Sir," he said, and Zachary felt his shoulders tense involuntarily. Quote 5. The words settled between them like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that Zachary tried desperately to ignore. He had become an expert at this particular form of torture, sitting through evenings where he watched James with Sandra, cataloging every touch, every shared glance, every moment of intimacy that reminded him of everything he couldn't have. "Sure," he heard himself say, the word coming out steadier than he felt. "Sounds great." But it wasn't great, and as the weeks passed, Zachary found himself becoming a ghost in his own life, moving through conversations and social gatherings with a smile that felt painted on his face. He had perfected the art of being the supportive friend, the one who listened when James complained about Sandra's tendency to check her phone during dinner, the one who offered advice about relationships while his own heart twisted with each word. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, giving relationship guidance to the person he loved about how to love someone else. It was like being asked to build a bridge to an island he would never be allowed to visit, knowing that each piece of advice, each moment of support, was helping James move further away from any possibility of them. It was during one of these conversations, on a particularly cold evening in November, that something shifted. James had arrived at their shared apartment looking frustrated, his jacket still damp from the rain outside. Sandra had canceled their date again, citing work obligations, and James seemed more deflated than angry. "What do we get?" James said, collapsing onto the couch with a heaviness that seemed to settle into his bones. Still, Zachary looked up from the book he had been pretending to read, studying James's profile in the lamplight. There was something different in his expression, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. Quote 10, he offered, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Quote 11. James replied, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. He turned to face Zachary fully, and there was something in his eyes that made Zachary's breath catch. Quote 12, quote, James's voice was quiet, thoughtful, and Zachary felt something shift in the air between them. The question hung in the space between them, loaded with implications that Zachary wasn't sure either of them was ready to explore. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Zachary had seen countless times, but which now seemed charged with a nervous energy he hadn't noticed before. I don't know, it's just, sometimes I look at my life, at my relationship with Sandra, and I feel like I'm following a script that someone else wrote. Like I'm supposed to want this, supposed to be happy, but something's missing. The words hit Zachary like a physical blow, hope and terror warring in his chest. He set his book aside carefully, giving James his full attention. What do you think is missing? I don't know, James admitted, and there was a frustration in his voice that spoke to something deeper than relationship troubles. Connection, maybe, real connection. The kind where you don't have to explain yourself, where someone just gets you. Zachary felt his heart hammering against his ribs. They were treading into dangerous territory, the kind of conversation that could change everything or destroy it completely. That sounds important, he managed to say. It is, James replied, and then, after a pause that seemed to stretch for eternity, I have that with you. The words settled between them like a confession, and Zachary felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. James was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and recognition, as if he was seeing something for the first time that had always been there. Quote 23, Zachary started, but he didn't know how to finish the sentence. How do you respond to something that could mean everything or nothing, depending on the interpretation? I know it sounds crazy, James continued, his voice gaining strength as if speaking the words was giving him courage. But sometimes I think about what it would be like if things were different, if I could just be honest about what I want instead of what I think I'm supposed to want. The fire crackled in the fireplace, filling the silence that stretched between them. Zachary felt as if he was standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that his next words could either pull him back to safety or send him tumbling into the unknown. What do you want? He asked quietly. James looked at him for a long moment, and Zachary could see something working behind his eyes, some internal struggle between fear and desire. I want to feel like I'm home when I'm with someone, he said finally. I want to feel like myself, completely and honestly myself, without having to perform or pretend. And you don't feel that way with Sandra? No, James admitted, and the word came out like a sigh of relief. I don't, but I do feel that way with you. The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and dangerous and full of possibility. Zachary felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble, 2 years of hidden feelings threatening to spill over like water through a broken dam. He wanted to reach out, to close the distance between them on the couch, to tell James that he felt the same way, had always felt the same way. But fear held him back, the terror of ruining what they had in pursuit of what they might have. Zachary, James said softly, and there was something in the way he said his name that made Zachary look up, meeting his eyes directly. I've been thinking about things, about us, and I need to ask you something. Okay. Have you ever thought about kissing me? The question was so direct, so unexpected, that Zachary felt his breath leave his lungs in a rush. James was watching him intently, waiting for an answer, and Zachary realized that this was the moment where everything would change, one way or another. Yes, he whispered, the word barely audible but somehow filling the entire room. Every day for the past 2 years. James's eyes widened, and Zachary saw something like relief wash over his features. Quote, quote, Zachary corrected, and despite everything, he found himself almost smiling at the precision of it. Quote, quote, and James breathed, running both hands through his hair now. Quote, James Voss said, and there was genuine anguish in his voice. Quote, watch as Zachary felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally having the truth between them. Quote, James insisted. Quote, the words washed over Zachary like a wave, and he felt something inside his chest break open, not with pain, but with a joy so intense it was almost overwhelming. "Put four down," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. Quote 50, James said suddenly, as if the thought had just occurred to him. Quote 51, quote 52, Zachary asked, though every fiber of his being was screaming, "Yes, please, be sure." Quote 53, James replied, and there was a certainty in his voice that made Zachary's heart soar. "I want to try this with you. I want to see what we could be if we stopped being afraid." Zachary felt a smile break across his face, the first genuine smile he'd worn in months. Quote 55, James moved closer on the couch, close enough that Zachary could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Quote Barrett, he asked, his voice soft and uncertain and hopeful all at once. Quote 57, Zachary whispered, and then James's lips were on his, soft and warm and perfect, and everything else fell away. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking the spell. But then James's hand came up to cup Zachary's face, thumb brushing across his cheekbone, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming alive after years of sleepwalking. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, James rested his forehead against Zachary's. He breathed. Zachary agreed, his voice barely a whisper. 60. They sat like that for a moment, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, and Zachary felt as if the world had rearranged itself around them. Everything looked the same, but felt completely different, as if someone had adjusted the color saturation of his entire life, James admitted quietly. Quote 62. Zachary replied. Quote 63. James laughed softly and the sound sent warmth spreading through Zachary's chest. I've never done this before. Been with a man, I mean. We'll figure it out together, Zachary said, and he meant it. There's no rush, no pressure. We can take it as slow as you need. What if I'm terrible at this? James asked, vulnerability clear in his voice. Impossible, Zachary replied without hesitation. You're you. That's all I've ever wanted. The next few weeks passed in a blur of discovery and adjustment. James broke up with Sandra with a gentleness that spoke to his character, explaining that he had realized he wasn't being fair to either of them by continuing a relationship where his heart wasn't fully invested. Sandra, to her credit, seemed more relieved than heartbroken, admitting that she had sensed his emotional distance but hadn't known how to address it. Zachary and James moved carefully through the early days of their relationship, learning each other in new ways. There were moments of awkwardness, times when the shift from friendship to romance felt strange and unfamiliar. But there were also moments of such natural intimacy that Zachary wondered how they had ever been anything else. They established new routines, small rituals that marked the change in their relationship. Morning coffee became an opportunity for gentle touches and soft kisses. Evening conversations on the couch now included the possibility of James's head in Zachary's lap, or their legs tangled together as they watched movies. They were learning the language of physical affection, the grammar of touch that had been forbidden to them before. One evening, about 3 weeks after their first kiss, they were lying in Zachary's bed, James's head on his chest, when James spoke into the comfortable silence between them. He said quietly. Zachary's hands stilled in James's hair. Zachary considered this, feeling the steady rhythm of James's breathing against his ribs. I don't think it was wasted, he said finally. I think we needed that time. You needed to figure out who you were, what you wanted. I needed to learn how to love you without expecting anything in return. James lifted his head to look at him. You really believe that? I do, Zachary replied, and he realized that he meant it completely. Everything that happened before brought us to this moment. I wouldn't change any of it, even the hard parts, because they made this possible. James smiled, and there was something in his expression that took Zachary's breath away. It was love, pure and simple and overwhelming in its intensity. James said, and though it wasn't the first time he had said the words, they still hit Zachary like a physical force. I love you too, Zachary replied, as he had every time. But tonight the words felt different somehow, more settled, more permanent. I want to tell people, James said suddenly, about us. I want to stop hiding. Zachary felt a flutter of nervousness in his stomach. They had been keeping their relationship private, not out of shame but out of caution, wanting to make sure they were solid before opening themselves up to outside opinions and potential complications. Are you ready for that? I'm ready to stop pretending you're just my roommate when you're actually the love of my life, James said with a conviction that made Zachary's heart race. Quote 84, Zachary repeated, teasing gently. Quote 85, James replied, grinning. Quote 86, Zachary laughed, pulling James up for a kiss that tasted like toothpaste and contentment, and the promise of 1,000 more nights just like this one. When they broke apart, James settled back against his chest, and Zachary felt the particular peace that came from being exactly where he belonged. Quote 87, Zachary said, and it wasn't a question. We'll tell people, James confirmed, starting with Wayne Rogers tomorrow. I think he suspected something anyway. Wayne Rogers was James's older brother, a man with an uncanny ability to read people and situations. Zachary had always liked him, but the thought of coming out to James's family still made his palms sweat slightly. He'll be happy for us, James said, as if reading his thoughts. He's always liked you better than any of the women I've dated anyway. Really? Really, he told me once that you were the only person who ever made me seem like myself instead of some version of myself I thought I was supposed to be. The words hit Zachary with unexpected force, and he felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He said that? He said that, James confirmed. Turns out my brother has better gaydar than I do. They both laughed at that, and the sound filled the room with warmth and possibility. Zachary felt a sense of completion he had never experienced before, as if all the scattered pieces of his life had finally arranged themselves into a picture that made sense. The conversation with Wayne Rogers went better than either of them had expected. James's brother took the news with a knowing smile and a comment about it being, quote, 97, quote, before pulling them both into a hug that lasted long enough to make James tear up. Wayne's acceptance seemed to give James the confidence he needed to start sharing their relationship with other friends and family members, each conversation building his comfort with his new identity. Zachary watched James navigate this process with a mixture of pride and protectiveness. There were moments of difficulty, conversations that didn't go as smoothly as the one with Wayne, but James faced each challenge with a courage that Zachary found inspiring. He was discovering parts of himself he hadn't known existed, and Zachary felt privileged to witness the process. Their relationship continued to deepen as the weeks turned into months. They learned each other's bodies with the same careful attention they had once given to each other's minds and hearts. James approached physical intimacy with the same thoughtfulness he brought to everything else, asking questions, communicating his needs and boundaries, making sure Zachary felt comfortable and desired. There were still moments of uncertainty, times when James would pull back slightly, overwhelmed by the newness of it all. During these moments, Zachary learned to give him space while making it clear that he wasn't going anywhere, that James could take all the time he needed to adjust to this new version of himself. One particularly memorable evening, they were cooking dinner together when James suddenly stopped stirring the sauce he was tending and turned to face Zachary with an expression of wonder on his face. Quote 98, Zachary asked, setting down his knife and giving James his full attention. Quote 99, James said, his voice filled with a kind of amazement. Quote 100, Zachary felt his heart swell with emotion. Quote counter, quote on. James confirmed, moving closer until he could wrap his arms around Zachary's waist. It's like I've been living in black and white my whole life, and suddenly everything is in color. That's a terrible cliche, Zachary pointed out, but he was smiling as he said it. I don't care, James replied, grinning back. It's true, you make everything brighter. They kissed then, slow and sweet, with the smell of garlic and herbs filling the air around them, and the sound of something sizzling on the stove providing a soundtrack to their contentment. When they broke apart, James rested his forehead against Zachary's and sighed contentedly. He said simply, Zachary replied, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. As spring arrived, bringing with it longer days and warmer weather, their relationship settled into a comfortable rhythm. They had moved past the initial uncertainty and into something that felt stable and permanent. They talked about the future now, making plans that extended beyond the next few weeks or months. James started referring to Zachary as his boyfriend without hesitation, and Zachary felt a thrill every time he heard the word. They decided to take a weekend trip to the mountains, their first official getaway as a couple. The cabin they rented was small and rustic, with a fireplace and a view of the lake that took their breath away. They spent their days hiking and their evenings on the porch, talking and laughing and marveling at how easy everything felt between them. On their last night there, they were sitting by the fire when James turned to Zachary with an expression that was both serious and tender. "Quote, he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Quote, "Waduanan," Zachary replied, though something in James's tone made his heart rate quicken. "I know it's only been a few months, and I know we're still figuring things out, but I can't imagine my life without you in it, not just as my boyfriend, but as my partner, my person, my future." James paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I want to know if you feel the same way." Zachary felt tears spring to his eyes, overwhelmed by the love and certainty in James's voice. James said simply. Zachary whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Watson, James smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. 118. The months that followed their mountain getaway were filled with a sense of purpose and direction that Zachary had never experienced before. They began making concrete plans for their future together, talking about everything from career goals to where they wanted to live, to whether they wanted children. These conversations, which might have felt overwhelming in past relationships, felt natural and exciting with James. They decided to look for a larger apartment, something that would be truly theirs rather than the space Zachary had been renting when James moved in as his roommate. The apartment hunting process became an adventure in itself, with each viewing teaching them something new about their shared vision for their home. They found the perfect place in early summer, a two-bedroom apartment with large windows and a balcony that overlooked a tree-lined street. The extra bedroom would serve as a home office for Zachary, who had recently started freelancing as a graphic designer, and a music room for James, who had been teaching himself guitar. Moving day was chaotic and exhausting, but also filled with laughter and the particular joy that comes from building something together. Their friends rallied to help, and Zachary found himself surrounded by people who clearly loved and supported their relationship. Wayne Rogers showed up with a truck and a cooler full of beer, and even Sandra stopped by with pizza, having remained on friendly terms with James after their breakup. As the day wound down and their friends departed, Zachary and James found themselves alone in their new space, surrounded by boxes but finally home. They ordered Chinese takeout and ate it sitting on the floor, their backs against the wall, surveying their new domain. 190, James said, gesturing around the apartment with his chopsticks. 190, Zachary corrected, but he was smiling as he said it. 190, James replied, and there was something in his voice that made Zachary look at him more closely. 122, James said thoughtfully. Zachary reached over and took James's hand, intertwining their fingers. "Do you ever regret it, the way everything happened?" "Never," James said without hesitation. "Not for a single second. Even the hard parts, even the confusion and the fear. It was all worth it to get to this." "Good," Zachary said, bringing James's hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to his knuckles. 129, 130, James asked, and though his tone was light, there was something vulnerable in his eyes. 131, Zachary confirmed, and he meant it with every part of himself. They spent their first night in the new apartment on an air mattress in what would become their bedroom, talking quietly in the dark about their hopes and dreams and fears. James confessed that he sometimes still felt overwhelmed by how much his life had changed, how different he was from the person he had been a year ago. Zachary listened, offering reassurance and understanding, marveling at James's courage in embracing such fundamental change. "I keep thinking about that night when you asked me if I'd ever thought about kissing you," Zachary said as they lay tangled together in the darkness. "What about it?" "I think that was the moment everything really changed. Not when we kissed, but when you asked the question. It was like you opened a door that neither of us could close." James was quiet for a moment, and Zachary could feel him thinking. "I was so scared to ask," he admitted finally. "I thought you might say no, or worse, that you might say yes out of pity or friendship or something." "There was never any pity involved," Zachary said firmly. "Only love. Always love." I know that now, James replied, his voice soft in the darkness. But it took me a while to believe that someone could love me the way you do. And how do I love you? Zachary asked, curious about James's perspective. Quote 142, James said without hesitation. Quote 40, the words hit Zachary with unexpected force, and he felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Quote 144, he whispered. Quote 140 feet, James replied, and there was wonder in his voice. Quote 146, as autumn arrived and they settled into their new home, their relationship continued to evolve and deepen. They had established routines and traditions that felt uniquely theirs. Sunday morning pancakes became a ritual, with James handling the cooking while Zachary made coffee and read interesting articles aloud from his phone. They discovered a shared love of hiking and spent many weekends exploring trails in the surrounding area, talking and laughing as they walked. James had fully embraced his identity as a gay man, joining a local LGBTQ support group and even volunteering at Pride events. Watching him find his place in the community filled Zachary with pride and admiration. James approached this new aspect of his life with the same thoughtfulness and dedication he brought to everything else. And Zachary loved seeing him grow more confident and comfortable in his own skin. Their physical relationship had also evolved beautifully. James had initially been nervous about intimacy, worried that his inexperience would disappoint Zachary, but those fears had quickly proven unfounded. They were perfectly matched in their desires and needs, and their connection only grew stronger as they learned each other's bodies and preferences. One evening in late October, as they sat on their balcony watching the leaves change colors, James brought up a topic that had been on both their minds. I've been thinking about next year, he said, his voice thoughtful. What about it? Zachary asked, though he had a feeling he knew where this conversation was heading. About us. About making things more official. Zachary felt his heart skip a beat. They had talked about marriage in abstract terms before, but never as something immediate or concrete. Official how? I want to marry you, James said simply, turning to face Zachary fully. Not right away, not tomorrow, but soon. I want everyone to know that you're my person, my family, my forever. James, Zachary breathed, overwhelmed by the love and certainty in James's voice. But James reached over and took Zachary's hand, his thumb brushing across his knuckles in the gesture that had become so familiar and precious to both of them. It doesn't feel fast to me either, Zachary admitted. It feels inevitable, in the best possible way. So you'll marry me? James asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that made Zachary's heart ache with love. Quote why, Zachary asked, smiling through the tears that had started to gather in his eyes. Quote why not, James said, grinning back. Quote wakadam. Zachary laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the crisp autumn air. Quote what's ma'am? James leaned over and kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Zachary felt as if his heart might burst from the sheer volume of love and happiness contained within his chest. When they broke apart, James rested his forehead against Zachary's, and they sat like that for a long moment, breathing the same air and marveling at the perfection of the moment. I love you, James whispered. I love you too, Zachary replied, and the words felt like a prayer, like a promise, like everything he had ever wanted to say distilled into 4 simple syllables. As winter approached and the holidays drew near, they began making plans to spend Christmas with James's family. It would be their first major holiday as an engaged couple, though they decided to keep their engagement private until after James's official proposal. Wayne Rogers had invited them to spend Christmas Eve at his house, and James's parents would be joining them for dinner. Zachary felt nervous about the gathering, despite having met James's parents several times since they had started dating. They had been accepting and welcoming, but there was something about the holidays that made everything feel more significant, more permanent. They love you, James assured him as they drove to Wayne's house on Christmas Eve. Zachary protested, though he was smiling. Quote 167 mile, James insisted. Quote 168. Quote 169 Zachary said, and he meant it. The acceptance and love they had shown him had been one of the greatest gifts of the past year. Quote 170. James replied, reaching over to squeeze his hand. Quote 70. The evening was everything Zachary had hoped it would be and more. James's family welcomed him with warmth and affection, treating him not as James's boyfriend, but as a beloved member of the family. They exchanged gifts and shared stories, and Zachary found himself thinking about how different this Christmas was from the previous year, when he had spent the holiday nursing his unrequited love and trying to be happy for James's relationship with Sandra. As they drove home that night, both full of good food and wine, and the particular contentment that comes from being surrounded by people who love you, Zachary reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, noticing his contemplative mood. "Just how much has changed," Zachary replied. "Last Christmas, I was so miserable. I kept thinking about how much I loved you and how impossible it seemed that you could ever feel the same way." "I'm sorry," James said quietly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to figure it out." "Don't be sorry," Zachary said firmly. "Everything happened exactly when it was supposed to happen. We're here now, and that's all that matters." James smiled, reaching over to take his hand. "We're here now," he agreed. The new year brought with it a sense of possibility and excitement. James had been secretly planning his proposal, enlisting Wayne's help in choosing a ring and planning the perfect moment. Zachary pretended not to notice the hushed phone conversations and mysterious errands, enjoying the anticipation and the knowledge that something wonderful was coming. The proposal, when it finally came, was perfect in its simplicity. James had planned an elaborate surprise involving their favorite hiking trail and a picnic lunch, but a sudden snowstorm forced them to stay indoors. Instead, he proposed in their living room, surrounded by the life they had built together, with their favorite playlist providing a soundtrack to the moment. Quote 180, James said, dropping to one knee beside their couch where Zachary was reading. Quote 1 quote on Zachary breathed, his book falling forgotten to the floor. Quote Watershawn, James pulled out a simple gold band, elegant and understated, exactly what Zachary would have chosen for himself. Quote Washington, he said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. Zachary whispered, and then louder. James slipped the ring onto his finger with shaking hands, and then they were kissing and crying and laughing all at once, overcome with the magnitude of the moment and the promise it represented. Quote, when idiot, James said against his lips. Quote, when I got on, Zachary replied. Quote, the engagement period was a whirlwind of planning and preparation, but also of deepening intimacy and connection. They chose a small ceremony in the mountains where they had taken their first trip as a couple, with only their closest friends and family in attendance. The planning process revealed new aspects of their compatibility, as they discovered they shared similar visions for their wedding day and their future together. James threw himself into wedding planning with characteristic enthusiasm, researching venues and vendors with the same attention to detail he brought to his work. Zachary found himself constantly amazed by James's thoughtfulness and care, the way he considered every detail to ensure their day would be perfect. I want everything to be perfect for you, James said one evening as they pored over flower arrangements and menu options. It will be perfect because it's us, Zachary replied, pulling James away from the laptop and into his arms. The details don't matter as much as the fact that we're promising to love each other forever. When did you get so wise? James asked, smiling as he settled into Zachary's embrace. Quote 195. Zachary replied, pressing a kiss to the top of James's head. The wedding day itself was everything they had dreamed it would be and more. The weather was perfect, with clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. Their families and friends gathered around them with love and support, and Zachary felt overwhelmed by the beauty of the moment and the community that surrounded them. When it came time to exchange vows, James spoke first, his voice clear and strong, as he promised to love and cherish Zachary for the rest of his life. He talked about the journey that had brought them together, about the courage it had taken to embrace love when it came in an unexpected form, about the joy he had found in building a life with his best friend and soulmate. Zachary's vows were equally heartfelt, expressing gratitude for James's courage in pursuing love, even when it meant changing everything about how he saw himself. He spoke about the privilege of witnessing James's journey of self-discovery, about the honor of being chosen as his partner and companion for life. Quote 190, Zachary said, his voice thick with emotion. 97. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience as they exchanged rings and sealed their commitment with a kiss that felt like coming home and setting off on an adventure all at once. The reception was a celebration of love and community, filled with laughter and dancing and heartfelt speeches from friends and family. Wayne Rogers gave a toast that had everyone in tears, talking about watching his brother discover who he was meant to be and the joy he had found in seeing James with Zachary. "I've known James my whole life," Wayne said, raising his glass, "but I've never seen him as happy as he is with Zachary. They bring out the best in each other, and their love makes everyone around them believe in the power of finding your person. To James and Zachary, and to the beautiful life they're building together." As the evening wound down and their guests began to depart, James and Zachary found themselves alone on the dance floor, swaying slowly to a song that had been playing the night of their first kiss. The parallel wasn't lost on either of them, and they held each other close, marveling at how far they had come. James whispered into Zachary's ear. "We did," Zachary agreed, pulling back to look into his husband's eyes. "Doctor too, and Quote James asked. "Quote Zachary replied honestly. Quote James said, smiling. "Quote no." The honeymoon was a perfect blend of adventure and relaxation. 2 weeks in Italy exploring ancient cities and lounging on Mediterranean beaches. They talked about their future, making plans and dreaming dreams. But they also simply enjoyed being together without the distractions of work and wedding planning. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their hotel room overlooking the Tuscan countryside, James brought up a conversation they had been having intermittently throughout their relationship. Quote 208. James said, swirling the wine in his glass. Quote Dichuanin, quote Tomaneon. Zachary nodded, understanding where James was going with this. Quote 211, quote 212, and James paused, taking a sip of wine before continuing. Quote, "I asked 233, quote, and Zachary observed. Quote, Fasa, quote, James agreed, quote, quote, Zachary said, reaching over to take James's hand. "Me too," James replied, bringing Zachary's hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to his palm. When they returned from their honeymoon, they settled into married life with the same ease that had characterized their entire relationship. They had already been living together for over a year, so the practical aspects of marriage felt natural and familiar. What was different was the sense of permanence, the knowledge that they had made a public commitment to love and support each other for the rest of their lives. They continued to grow and evolve both individually and as a couple. James pursued a promotion at work and began taking evening classes to further his education. Zachary's freelance business flourished, and he was able to take on more challenging and creative projects. They supported each other's goals and celebrated each other's successes, finding joy in watching their partner thrive. 1 year after their wedding, they were back in the mountains for their anniversary, staying at the same cabin where they had first talked about building a future together. As they sat by the fire, much as they had that first night, Zachary marveled at how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, noticing his contemplative mood. "Just how perfect this all is," Zachary replied. "Not perfect in the sense of being without challenges or difficulties, but perfect in the sense of being exactly right for us." "I know what you mean," James said, moving closer on the couch until their shoulders were touching. "Sometimes I can't believe this is my life. Sometimes I can't believe I get to love you and be loved by you every single day." "Believe it," Zachary said, turning to face his husband fully. "This is real, this is ours, and this is forever." "Forever," James repeated, and the words sounded like a promise and a prayer all at once. They made love that night with a tenderness and passion that spoke to the depth of their connection, celebrating not just their anniversary, but the entire journey that had brought them to this moment. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Zachary felt a profound sense of gratitude for the path that had led them here. "I love you," he whispered into the quiet. "I love you too," James replied, his voice soft with sleep and contentment. As they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, Zachary thought about the conversation that had started it all. That night when James had asked if he had ever thought about kissing him. It seemed like a lifetime ago, but also like yesterday. The courage it had taken for James to ask that question, to open himself up to the possibility of love in an unexpected form, had changed both their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Now, lying in their cabin in the mountains, surrounded by the life they had built together, Zachary understood that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that catch you completely off guard. Sometimes the person you're meant to spend your life with is right there beside you, waiting for you to be brave enough to see them clearly. And sometimes when you finally find the courage to ask the question that terrifies you most, the answer is everything you've ever hoped for and more. James stirred beside him, pulling him closer in his sleep, and Zachary smiled into the darkness. They had found their way to each other despite all the obstacles and uncertainties, despite the fear and confusion and doubt. They had chosen love, chosen courage, chosen each other. And that, Zachary thought as sleep finally claimed him, was the most beautiful thing of all. The morning light filtered through the cabin windows, casting golden patterns across the wooden floor as Zachary woke to the sound of James humming softly in the kitchen. It was a sound that had become the soundtrack to his mornings, a gentle melody that spoke of contentment in home and the particular joy that comes from waking up next to the person you love most in the world. He found James at the stove, making pancakes in his pajama pants and the worn t-shirt he had been wearing the morning this all began, though now it held different memories, sweeter associations. James looked up when he heard Zachary's footsteps, and his face broke into the smile that still had the power to make Zachary's heart skip a beat. Quote 231. James said, the word rolling off his tongue with the ease of long practice but still carrying the weight of wonder and gratitude. Quote 232. Zachary replied, moving to wrap his arms around James from behind, pressing a kiss to the spot where his neck met his shoulder. Quote 233. Quote 230. James agreed, leaning back into the embrace. Quote 235. As they ate breakfast together, talking and laughing about everything and nothing, Zachary reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't always been easy, the path from friendship to love to marriage. There had been moments of uncertainty, times when they had both questioned whether they were making the right choices, whether they were brave enough to build the life they dreamed of together. But every challenge had only served to strengthen their bond. Every obstacle overcome had deepened their appreciation for what they had found in each other. They had learned to communicate with honesty and vulnerability, to support each other's growth and dreams, to find joy in the simple moments as well as the grand gestures. Quote 236. James asked, reaching across the small table to take Zachary's hand. I was thinking we could hike up to the overlook where you were going to propose, Zachary suggested. Full circle and all that. Perfect, James agreed, his thumb brushing across Zachary's wedding ring. Zachary promised, bringing James's hand to his lips. I'll always say yes to you. Later, as they stood at the scenic overlook that had been the site of James's original proposal plans, looking out over the valley spread below them, Zachary felt a profound sense of completion. This was where their story had truly begun, in the courage to ask difficult questions and the willingness to embrace unexpected answers. Quota 243, James said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. James turned to face him fully, and there was something in his expression that took Zachary's breath away. The same wonder and love that had been there the night of their first kiss, but deeper now, richer, seasoned with the knowledge of what they had built together. I love our story, Zachary said simply. Me too, James replied. Every messy, beautiful, imperfect, perfect part of it. As they made their way back down the mountain, hand in hand, Zachary thought about all the people who would hear their story, who would find hope and courage in the knowledge that love can come from the most unexpected places, that sometimes the person you're meant to be with has been right there all along, waiting for you to be brave enough to see them clearly. He thought about the night James had said he missed how easy they used to be, before leaning in without saying a word, how that moment had contained everything, all the longing and fear and hope that had been building between them for years. How a single kiss had opened the door to a future neither of them had dared to imagine. Their love story wasn't unique in its broad strokes, perhaps. Friends becoming lovers, confusion giving way to clarity, courage overcoming fear. But in its details, in the specific ways they had found each other and chosen each other and built a life together, it was entirely their own. And as they drove home through the mountain roads, planning the rest of their lives together with the easy intimacy of people who know they have found their person, Zachary understood that this was what happiness looked like. Not a destination to be reached, but a journey to be shared, one day at a time, one moment at a time, one choice to love each other at a time. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that begin with a simple question and end with a lifetime of answers. Sometimes the greatest adventures start with the courage to lean in without saying a word. And sometimes when you finally stop running from love and start running toward it, you discover that everything you've ever wanted has been waiting for you all along.